The Galileo spacecraft on its way to Jupiter had to swing by a couple of planets to get enough gravitational boost to head to Jupiter quickly. And during a swing by of one of those planets, it performed a fascinating experiment looking for life on that planet. Let me show you some of the results from that experiment. It's fitting, I think, that this experiment, this what I think of as the best experiment searching for life, comes from Sagan. That's Carl Sagan, who analyzed the data, came to the interesting conclusions. Here's one. Looking at this planet and looking down, there is abundant evidence in the visible part of the wavelength. Well, this is really the near infrared part of the wavelength, and then in the infrared part of the wavelength for water vapor in the atmosphere. Water vapor in the atmosphere has absorptions here, 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 here. You see plenty of it. Out in the infrared at 3 microns, this whole depression of this spectrum is because of the water vapor. There's a lot of other stuff in there too. There's methane. We'll talk a lot about methane in a little bit. There's more water vapor over here. N2O is an important one that we're not going to talk about, but a little bit of CO, a little bit of CO2. And critically, there is this line of oxygen. Now, oxygen, if you remember from the broadband spectra that I was showing you earlier, oxygen is very difficult to see. Normally we're looking at things like ozone, but here we actually detect the oxygen itself in a very weak line in the near infrared. A very weak line in the near infrared showing oxygen is clear indication that this planet has abundant oxygen on it. What else is abundant? Abundant oxygen, abundant water vapor, and even though this is a little dip right there, it has abundant methane on it. A fascinating place, I'm sure. Let me show you some of the pictures that the Galileo spacecraft took and see if we can interpret what might be happening there. Oh, and I might have neglected to mention the planet the Galileo went by. It was the Earth. Carl Sagan used the opportunity of an Earth flyby to try to ask the question, if you didn't know there was life on Earth, would the Galileo spacecraft been able to prove it conclusively? Or perhaps would it have suggested it, or perhaps would it have had no idea whatsoever that there was life there. And Carl Sagan and his co-authors looked at all the data that Galileo collected and tried to evaluate from scratch the possibility that the Earth might have life on it. So the flyby came in over the South Pole. There are beautiful images of Antarctica, and there are spectra of Antarctica that show not just water vapor, but showed that this big high albedo patch of the surface of the Earth is indeed water ice, just like those spectra that we see of places like Europa and Enceladus. It came in from the night side, and as it swung around the South Pole, it stared back at the Earth and got these sorts of images. And we, of course, know this is South America, but what they found is that there were these large patches of blue and featureless regions on the planet. And in fact, in some images, there were specular reflections off of those locations. Specular reflections are, of course, where you have, the sun is here and you have a lake here and you're sitting right here. The sunlight reflects directly off of the lake like the lake is a mirror, and you see it in the waves, that sunset view across the ocean. They got some of these in through here. You don't see any of them right here. That, along with the spectra of these regions, was clear indication that there was liquid water on much of the planet, frozen water down here at the South Pole, and these white features that you see here moved around with time. Not much, the flyby was very fast, but they could tell that they were moving some and could clearly be interpreted as cloud features in the atmosphere. The inference was made, I think fairly, that this is a planet that is dominated by liquid water, frozen at the South Pole, but liquid in most locations, and with abundant water vapor in the air. The Galileo spacecraft could use thermal emission spectroscopy, the same things we've been talking about the whole time, to get the temperatures across here, and found indeed that the temperature here is something like 0 degrees Celsius, like it should be on the surface of something that's ice, and progressively warmer up through here. So perfectly consistent with the idea of a world dominated by liquid water. One of the very interesting things that the Galileo spacecraft did is took these images of this location on the Earth in many different filters. They just had a camera and then put filters in front of it to look at it at different wavelengths. And 3 of those filters spanned the range 0.73 microns, 0.76 microns, and should have put it up here, 0.67 microns. And something very unusual was found in these 3 filters, which are very close together in wavelength. So you wouldn't expect to have dramatic differences in how the surface looks across these wavelengths. And yet, dramatic differences there are. In particular, if you make a false color image where you turn this into red, this into green, this into blue, that means anything that's very bright at this wavelength will show up as red. Anything that's about the same brightness as these three will show up as a white color. Anything that's very faint at this wavelength will show up in blue. And what do you see? You see these regions all through here, which are very red. Very red, meaning they have a lot of reflection right at 0.76 microns. In fact, if you look at spectra of these regions, A is this region of the coastline right here, which doesn't look red. B is perhaps a mixture, and C is right in this very red material. The spectrum looks like this. Now, before I was just showing you images constructed with these three wavelengths. Now I'm showing you a few more, and what you see is quite dramatically area C, that one that looked very red, gets dark here and then dramatically shoots up in brightness. Area A, nothing very interesting going on. Area B has a little bit of that same effect going on through here. What could this possibly be? There are no obvious minerals that should be present on the surface of a planet like this that would cause this sort of spectral signature. Would you know what this was if you didn't know what this was? Maybe. Carl Sagan makes the argument that perhaps you would have really inferred what's going on. And here's how you would have inferred what's going on. It all comes back to this detection of oxygen. This detection of oxygen implied a substantial amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. Now, it is possible to get oxygen in an atmosphere, particularly a water-dominated atmosphere, by having the water vapor rise up in the stratosphere, get dissociated by photons, and eventually recombine to make oxygen. What you would do if you had this detection of oxygen is you would do a detailed calculation of what the atmosphere should be like of a planet at this distance from this particular star. And you would say, we know how much water vapor is there. Can that explain the oxygen? Based on everything we know, and I think we would actually have done this right, there should be very little oxygen in this atmosphere. You might see a tiny dip, but not this huge one. The presence of oxygen is quite surprising. You then might make the argument, and Carl Sagan makes the case that you would make the argument, that this unique feature that you see right here is the possible signature of microbes which are harvesting sunlight. Of course, we know it's actually true. This is the red edge from chlorophyll, but the red edge from chlorophyll, even if you didn't know exactly which wavelength to be looking at, you might see microbes on whatever planet you're looking at have sequestered a very important region of the spectrum and have collected all of the light in their regions. To make this abundance of oxygen on the surface of the planet by photosynthesis would require that the planet has an abundance of this photosynthesis covering nearly the entire non-water surface. Is that the case? Well, yes. If you looked at those images of South America, there was abundant evidence for coverage of whatever this material was, and it certainly makes a consistent case that this is related to the high abundance of oxygen on the surface. What about that methane? I mentioned the methane before that was seen in the 3 micron region. That methane didn't look like very much, but there should be essentially zero methane in the atmosphere of the Earth. If you were to release methane into the atmosphere right away, it would be gone so fast you could hardly measure it. The abundance of methane in the atmosphere of this planet that was measured was something like 140, you think I'm going to say 140 times too much. No, 140 orders of magnitude. That means 10 to the 140th. That is a ridiculously big number. So basically, any methane in the atmosphere is quite a surprise. There is no purely geochemical or geological reason for that much methane. Now, there is methane produced in things like volcanoes and deep sea vents. We know that here on the ground. They didn't know this as they were flying by, or they pretended like they didn't know it. But in any case, there is this huge, huge abundance. Why is there such a huge abundance? Well, again, you would put this in the category of things that could be explained if you had methanogenesis going on in the microbes here on the Earth. These are intriguing examples, and you might ask, was there more? Well, Galileo spacecraft flew by, took images. It took images. It happened to take very high-resolution images across Australia, and took them at about a resolution of about 1 kilometer per pixel. And Carl Sagan and co-authors carefully searched through those images for any hints of structures that you could associate with life, and they came to the conclusion that no, there weren't any. In fact, they did find some that turned out to be large agricultural areas that you could discern at that resolution, but they made the case pretty convincingly that there's no way you would see those from space, not knowing what they were, and say, ah, clearly agricultural. In fact, other people have done studies and shown that if you get down to about 1/10 of a kilometer of resolution, you can start to see features that appear clearly man-made over very small parts of the Earth. It's not like the entire Earth is covered by man-made features. So you have to both get lucky and have very good resolution before you can really tell that there's stuff on the Earth caused by people. So far, it looks like a plausible biosphere. We don't have any idea what kind of biosphere. There's no hint of intelligent life in any of this. In fact, all of these signatures have been around for something like the last 2 billion years, if you'd gone and taken a look. But there was one instrument that picked up clear signals of both life and intelligent life, or whatever we call ourselves these days, and that was the radio receiver on Galileo. The radio receiver is not just the radio antenna that was communicating with Earth at the time, so that kind of doesn't count, but the radio experiment that was designed to go to Jupiter and detect radio emissions from Jupiter, from things like the aurora, from things like interaction with Io and its volcanoes. And in fact, those same sorts of things were detected from the Earth. There are emissions from the terrestrial aurora. These are, well, first let me show you what this spectrum is. So this is time down here. We'll talk about the lower one in a minute. This is time as it gets closer. Closest approach to the Earth is right here. And this is frequency, radio frequency, emission at different frequencies. And the color shows how intense the radio emission is. And so what you see here is these things that are labeled AKR, these things that start out in time and go down in frequency. These are auroral emissions, and very typical. It's what they look like on Earth, what they look like on Jupiter. These are radio bursts that come from the sun. Again, start at a very high frequency and go down and go down. These are things that are well known, well understood. As Galileo approached, here to closest approach, there was a nice set of emissions that came in like this, and these are typical ionospheric emissions from the Earth's ionosphere. They go up in frequency just like they're expected to. As you get closer, they go back down again, and intensity. All of this is well understood, and the sorts of things that we see from planets all the time. What's not are these right here. Doesn't look like much, but if you zoom in to a small section of it over here, which is just maybe this little section in through here, you see intense, you can tell intense by the color, intense radio emission at very steady frequencies. It's not changing in frequency. And it's intense at 2 different locations. And the best, most important part is here it is modulated. It's on, it's off. It's on, it's off. It's on, it's off. It's on, it's off. Very non-smooth way. Look at the way this emission happens, this emission. It's all very smoothly changing. This does not happen anywhere in nature, with the exception of like pulsars, which are very regular doing radio emissions. These radio emissions are, of course, radio transmitters from the Earth, and they also, interestingly, they only occur on the approach. The approach, if you remember that Galileo approached on the night side, and the Earth's ionosphere prevents some radio emissions from escaping from the surface of the Earth, and they bounce back in. On the night side, there's less of an ionosphere, so radio emissions can escape, and that's exactly what's in here. So not only do you know they're coming from the Earth, they get more intense as you get close to the Earth too, but they are inside the Earth's ionosphere because they disappear over here on the day side. They are modulated. It would be very difficult to see these and not, I think, jump up and down and say, we've just discovered not just life on this planet. We inferred that possibility from many of the other things about it, but we see this clear signal of intelligent radio transmission, or maybe sitcoms. So there you have it, our first mission designed to actually go look for life on the Earth. And other than the radio parts, it was convincing but not conclusive. You can imagine that these are the sorts of data we're going to start to get from other locations in the galaxy. And even in the case where we really know exactly what's going on, it's hard to make those conclusive statements. It's going to be tempting. People will really want to be able to say, we just discovered this life in this place. And there will be scientists, people like me probably, who remain skeptical until it can really be proved. In many ways, life should be the hypothesis of last resort. You should exhaust every other possibility before you finally say, this has to be life. Why? Because finding life somewhere else would be one of the most profound discoveries that humans had ever made. When you're faced with that possibility, I think you want to make sure when you do make that announcement that you get it right. Is it going to happen? No, it's too tempting. You make a discovery, you find oxygen somewhere, and you will see the press release happen the scientist will say, well, we discovered an atmosphere that possibly has life on it. The press release will change that to life discovered, and the newspaper articles will turn that into pictures of aliens walking around. It's an inevitable process. What I hope we have done here in this section on finding life in the universe is given you a little bit of that dose of healthy skepticism, so that when you see these press releases, the first thing you want to do is go see the actual data, see what they really discovered, and think for yourself. Do you believe that this was a discovery of life? Do you believe that this was a discovery of an Earth-like planet even? You know enough. You should be able to go do this. I want you to make up your mind for yourself when you start to see these breathless discoveries, because at some point it really will happen. And then, after you've looked through the paper, after you've looked at the data, I want you then to sit back and just be amazed at what the universe contains.